My name is Sonali Menezes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist based in Hamilton, Ontario. So that's just a big word for saying that I make a bunch of different kinds of art in different mediums. I would consider the role of art in the labor movement and in working class movements in terms of the value that it adds in terms of storytelling is just to add an additional entry point into the labor movement. One that is maybe potentially less urgent, one that allows you to come into a museum and enter the issues that are happening in the labor movement from a different perspective, one that involves color and texture and emotion and isn't an essay. So it's just a different way of entering the labor movement, I think. I think that art can also offer a perspective into the labor movement that makes it seem irresistible and exciting and maybe less intimidating. So an example that I would love to give is I'm a zine maker, so I make zines, which is like independent publishing. And I have traded zines at zine fairs with other zinesters when I first started making zines on various political topics. And it was a really great entry point for me to access these topics through a zine format, which is a DIY self-published magazine or pamphlet that's done quick and dirty on the photocopier. It's got fingerprints on it, and it's focused. And it was less intimidating than attending a lecture or Googling something on the internet, which is so vast and overwhelming. But instead, I received this like very focused topic on, for example, key questions I needed answered when I was like 18 on sexual health, and that was so important to access in a zine and accessible. So I have a number of zines on the labor movement, and I have found them very informative, and I love giving them to people to read. But I can talk about a project that I'm working on with Mayworks Festival in Toronto, which is a labor arts organization. So I'm doing their Labor Arts Catalyst project. So I've been partnered with a labor organization, Labor Against the Arms Trade, which advocates for an end to the arms trade in Canada and a just transition for arms trade workers. And so I'm going to be producing some art on this topic as an offering of like an entry point for folks to like enter into this topic of a just transition for arms trades workers and an end to the arms trade in a way that is not like a PowerPoint presentation or a lecture or an essay. Not to say that those are not very valuable points of entry. This is just another point of entry. So I'm going to be doing a series of silkscreen posters on these topics that include slogans and information and anti-war imagery. And I'm also going to be producing a zine on this topic with the goal of distributing it to arms trades workers in London, Ontario that produce light armored vehicles that are destined for Saudi Arabia that are then used on Yemen, which actually get transported straight through Hamilton on its way to the port in Baltimore. So all these things are connected. So I think that is a good example of like using art in the labor movement as another point of entry into the issues that people are already working towards. I would definitely consider artists to be workers. I wouldn't consider all artists to be workers in that their relationship to work might be different. So there are some artists who are landlords and some artists who are millionaires, and I would not consider them a part of the working class. But I think the perception is that artists, because there are sort of like bourgeois qualities that are attached to art. So when we think of like the art market and the people who buy art and appreciate art, we think of like bourgeois people who have a lot of money and can drop $1 million on a painting. But the reality of like actual working artists who I know who are in my life is that they're all working class people who are working hard to pay their bills. And are not dropping $1 million on a painting, are not homeowners, but are renters and are working in coffee shops and working in bars and also making their art at the same time. So I think there are some misconceptions. Of course, there are very rich artists. Of course, there are very privileged artists, but the reality is the majority of artists working today are working class people. The exhibition here at the Workers' Arts and Heritage Center right now is called The Future of Work, Letters from the Land and Water. And it was co-curated by Simranpreet Anand and Shomoyi Mitra. And we have a few artworks behind me by Jagdeep Raina, which are sort of highlighting embroidery and textile practices that were lost through colonialism. And he is exploring them and celebrating them and reviving them. What's nice about what Jagdeep Raina is doing in his artwork here is that he is telling the story of these lost embroidery and textile practices that were lost through colonialism. And he is showing viewers the beauty in these textiles that were lost and helping us see the value in these textile practices and what has been lost through colonialism. I think the role of artists is to make the labor movement and other social movements irresistible. And so our role is to make them exciting for people to enter, accessible, interesting, and not intimidating. We want to find points of relation where people can relate. So for me as an artist, if I make something, my goal is for the viewers to relate to it. If they're not able to relate to it, there's no entry point. They're not interested in it. So we want viewers to be able to relate to the issues that we're talking about. We want to make it personable. We want to affect people's emotions. If we're not able to affect people's emotions, they're not going to be interested in the art and they're not going to be interested in the issues. For me, the most important thing about my art is that it helps to connect people. I want it to resonate with people in my community. I don't want it to stand alone. I don't want it to be made and put out into the world and do nothing. I want it to function. I want it to do something. I want it to affect people's emotions, affect their actions if possible, and inspire.